blockchain sounds awesome, right? So what's the problem? Well, really no problems per se, but let's consider some questions.
Okay, so first, from a business perspective, blockchain is just another type of technology, but it's not a panacea to all business problems. So it's important that you have a type of business problem that lends itself to a blockchain solution.
Now, moving beyond that, though, there are other implications to consider. Blockchain has an impact on the environment, for example. Remember when we mentioned that blockchain is a distributed network. Each node on the network is a computer that requires electricity. Each of those computers is engaged in mining, effectively solving complicated mathematical problems to add blocks to the chain. These mining rigs require lots of electricity to both run the computers, but also for the cooling to prevent the computers from overheating. So I have students that have a spare laptop or computer in their dorm room, and they've downloaded mining software and use electricity in their dorm room 24 hours to mine, now albeit very mine inefficiently. And they think the electricity is free, but of course that comes at a cost.
So, okay, so just for someone who's a layman, someone who's not a technologist, you keep using the term mining. Like, what does that mean?
Basically, computers have to calculate a series of very complicated mathematical problems in order for them to be kind of approved to add an additional block or additional information onto this blockchain.
Okay.
And so this is a level of kind of security and access, a barrier to access, to prevent people from just adding things ad hoc onto the blockchain. Now, the ramification of this, however, is that takes an incredible amount of computing power and will continue to take more and more computing power. Now, and this is not just for Bitcoin, which is maybe the oldest or most well-known of the different types of cryptocurrency and blockchains out there, but for all the other different types of blockchain projects that have sprouted up, each of them requires some level of what they call mining. And so now we have these huge mining rigs or farms out in random places in the world that all they do is have these banks of computers that are basically calculating these series of mathematical problems in order to add more and more blocks to whatever blockchain they're working on.
Okay, so back to the environment and the implications for that. You may be surprised to learn that to mine Bitcoin, a 2017 estimate stated that mining Bitcoin exceeded the electricity production of 159 other countries individually. Okay, so they say 30 terawatt hours, whatever it means. It means a lot of electricity, right? So that's only for Bitcoin. And you can see that the electricity consumption would be much, much higher if it also included the mining of other types of blockchain.
I realize this is a fintech ethics course. So why should we be talking about the environment?
Okay, so from my standpoint, this is a really interesting and super, super important point that many of you maybe don't really think about. When we talk about the implications of these technologies, in this course, or if you're just reading about them, we're typically talking about like the person-to-person kind of transactional costs that they maybe have. So loss of privacy or access to finance. And those are super, super important. But what we also have to think about, and what we hope that you think about, is the broader social and physical, even geographical implications of these things. When we include technologies like this and we introduce these technologies, again, getting back to this concept of culture lag, the technology has far outpaced our understanding of how to really deal with that technology in our real lives and in terms of its implications for the natural environment. So now, there's good and bad examples of this. So in some places in Canada, for example, I've read where they're taking old abandoned sawmills and lumber industry that has been shut down or whatever, and they're retrofitting and like refitting those large facilities into like mining farms, which for some people is good, means more jobs, maybe brings income in there. But there's a lot of negative ramifications as well. So again, noise pollution is very serious, and so a lot of people in those communities are complaining about the noise. There's obviously the electricity consumption. So the vast majority of mine farms are in China, and the vast majority of the electricity from China comes from burning coal. And so there's very serious ramifications both now and in the future for things like that. But on the flip side, as culture kind of catches up to the technology, we're also starting to think more creatively about where to put these large institutions. So, for example, again in Canada, I've heard, I haven't really seen this in use, but I've heard that they're actually trying to use the heat that's generated from these mining computers and then to heat industrial complexes or maybe even other types of buildings and homes. So,
okay, so there's some different mixed uses or mixed purposes of having these the location based on these farms.
Yeah. So from a technology or fintech ethics standpoint, I'm curious to your perspective. Should a technologist, an inventor, whatever, a bank, should they have to, or should they even want to think about the environmental implications, or should it just be focused on the technology and the business model that they have?
So that's a great question, and I think a really fundamental question that we shouldn't just be considering in our course, but in a lot of different domains, to be frank. I think we're at the I think science is telling us that we're at the precipice of some really fundamental changes that are happening to the world and have been happening to the world. And I think if we try to silo ourselves off and say, well, what I'm doing is not directly related to that, I think we could collectively find ourselves in a place that we didn't intend to be.
Yeah.
So I think irrespective of industry, I think the impact that that industry is having on the environment is important to consider.
Yeah. Now, there are things we're going to talk about in later modules. You'll hear us talk about some positive uses of this technology. So again, it's not just about currency. Blockchain can be used to track diamonds, to make sure that they're not conflict diamonds or blood diamonds, as they're sometimes called. To track people in terms of either people that don't have a government ID, like refugees, or people that perhaps have been, migrant workers who potentially are at risk for human trafficking and slavery. So there are a lot of very positive utilizations of this technology, and even utilizations that have nothing to do with currency whatsoever. Yeah. But I think one of the things that we, as David was just mentioning, is we want you to constantly think about what is the balance between introducing these new technologies and the positive ramifications for change, the disruption, as Silicon Valley would say, to these markets, to the financial industry, but what are also the unintended and possibly negative consequences that can come from these things, not only now, but in the future. Because if we're not thinking about those things, then by the time we get to that point and we see them right in front of us, it might be too late.